Saudi Cup and welcome to another episode here for the Funk Report, Mindful Media and Communication. And today we talk about, and I'm very happy to talk about this, we talk about like a big hobby of mine, a big passion of mine, MMA, mixed martial arts, but we're connecting it to the media, of course. So you see the title, From Tap Outs to Tweets, and yes, I still call it tweets because it sounds much cooler. How media influences the fight game. From tap outs to exposed, from tap outs to threats. No, I stick with tweets. So how media influences the fight game. So yeah, welcome everyone. MMA, maybe maniacs, media geeks, wherever you are, welcome back to this episode here of the Funky Pod. And we're stepping into the octagon of public opinion today. Today we're dissecting how MMA intersects with and shapes the media landscape. And so expect paradigm shifts, tap outs, and a deep dive into everything from agenda setting to use and gratification. So let's get ready to run. No, that's the wrong one. It's time. So let's talk about MMA narratives and media framing to start things off, okay? So one of the big theories in media theory, media framing is the narrative theory, right? So just like in professional wrestling, for example, and in storytelling in general, we have heroes and villains. They're critical to storytelling, and storytelling is a big part of mixed martial arts. It makes you tune in, right? So promoters, UFC, One Championship, Bellator, PFL, and so on, and media outlets, they use framing to emotionally get us invested in the outcome of the fight. It's not always just, I want to see the best fighter. It's like, I want to cheer for someone. I want this guy to win. I want that guy to win, right? So let's try to keep it, I try not to make it too MMA nerd heavy so that everyone who's not a huge fan but just interested also understands it. So I'm going to take an example of Conor McGregor. Everyone knows the guy, right? So he's framed as the brash, trash-talking heel that people just love to hate, right? Unless you're from Ireland, they just love him. And the media, intentionally or maybe even not, they often reduce like multi-dimensional fighters into like one-dimensional roles because it's just easier to sell. It's not just about the fight, it's about the narrative that leads up to the fight. And Conor McGregor is just a great example, like this brash trash talker, like, yeah, I'm gonna you, and so, and he always has like good lines in the press conference, right? Always very funny. Probably gonna fight again in December this year. It's gonna be insanity if the fight actually happens with Michael Chandler. So that's one example. But a few more current ones, right? So if you look at cases such as, for example, Stylebender, Israel Adesanya, or like the new champ, Sean O'Malley, that shows how fighters can actually take control of their narratives, right? So because they tell their own stories, like Israel Adesanya is like this very cool YouTube channel, Free Stylebender, where they do like interviews that his brother does with him, for example. And he has like reactions to fights and whatnot. So he frames his own story. He tries to create his own narrative. And Sean O'Malley does the same thing, yeah? He has like his reaction channel with a coach on YouTube, the podcast. He's streaming, he's a game streamer, right? Where he also, of course, has lots of exposure to frame his narrative, which is smart. It's very smart. So that's like part of the media richness theory. This theory, right, tells us that they use high richness like media platforms like YouTube, Twitch, and whatnot to provide like nuanced messages. Okay, so the power of media framing in shaping heroes and heels can't be ignored. It's very important. And if you use like those high rich media platforms where you can send out more nuanced messages, that's perfect, yeah. And if you like get more exposure to the fans, they think they get to know you better. They establish some sort of a parasocial relationship with you. That's just fantastic. We can also look at the pay-per-view and I want to call it hype culture, because we see that a lot right now, right? If we move on to the agenda setting theory here, like organizations such as the UFC, they use their media reach to spotlight fights and fighters, like especially headline fighters, of course, that are like given prime positioning on like those promotional materials, right? But there's usually a catch to that. That the hype sometimes overshadows the actual sportsmanship, if you're honest, and sometimes also the talents of like the undercut fighters who aren't deemed as like as marketable, right? And I think we can see here that the two-step flow theory shows us that like popular fighters such as Conor McGregor again, they act as some form of opinion leader. And when Conor McGregor tweets something, it becomes news. Yeah. He just tweeted Sean O'Malley, for example, and then it's like, oh my God, what's happening? What are they doing? What are they setting up? So he says something, it becomes news. I have become news. So we should ask ourselves, like, are we letting the hype guide our attention and our emotional investment too much? Are we really looking into like who's the best fighter from a mixed martial arts perspective, or are we following the hype? Speaking of hype, right, we can also look at the social media and fan engagement. Yeah, participatory culture, as described by a very famous researcher named Henry Jenkins, it signifies that fans aren't just passive consumers, but very active contributors. Yeah, they engage with the media for various reasons, like entertainment, of course, information, but also a sense of community. Yeah, and that's in line with the use and gratification theory. The theory says I consume media content that gives me some form of, use. I get some use out of it, information, entertainment, and gratification. I feel like, that's beneficial to me. Okay. And if it's wanting to be part of the community, like for example, hashtag Team Chandler, Team McGregor, Team O'Malley, whatever, then that's also very, very beneficial here. Okay. And so social media, of course, is incredibly important. So every fighter is essentially their own media company, right? From Facebook to X to IG, TikTok. These platforms offer fighters opportunities to build their brands and engage with fans. Now, if you are somewhat more introverted and you don't like all those things, too bad. I'm also an introverted person, so I understand that, right? But if you don't do it, you might not reach as many people, unfortunately, right? Because we're in somewhat like an influencer economy, right? So fighters like McGregor, like Sean O'Malley, like Israel Adesanya, they're just not just athletes, but influencers with like a huge social reach. And thanks to platforms like that I just mentioned, or social media, they have like considerable influence that they funnel to followers, right? Again, what we said earlier, just to go full circle here, we call this the two-step flow theory. And there's lots of information floating around, and then it comes to that influencer, Adesanya, O'Malley, McGregor, whatever, and they send it to their followers, and their followers, they're taking it at face value. Okay. So this new influencer economy is clearly impacting fighters' motivations. It's not just about winning titles, it's about like, shares, follow accounts, and so I think back then, like Sean O'Malley, like I know a few years ago, he was like, I'm not fighting that guy. He's got only 500 followers on social media. Why would I fight that guy, right? So it's not just about winning. It's about like shares, likes, and so on. So the media landscape has expanded what it means to be successful in the fight game. It's not just about the title. I mean, the UFC created a completely new title out of thin air, the BMF title, to have like two super famous guys fight for it, right? And one more thing that we can see is that also independent journalism within MMA is expanding. Yeah, thanks to, and here we take influence from the public sphere theory. It says like that in this case, independent outlets offer like fresh perspectives and sometimes even counter narratives, Ariel Helwani, and that add like depth to public discourse and the sport. Right, so fans followers of the sport, they don't just want to watch the UFC channel, for example, or the One Championship channel, because the narrative is, of course, always very much pro-promotion. So they want to listen to other outlets, third parties that are not related maybe even with the main party, to get some more insights, more takes, more viewpoints, and so on. Okay, so that's the public sphere theory. However, they do face challenges like spirals of silence, for example, right? Because they also might lack like the protection of like major outlets. For example, ESPN working with the UFC, but because they're partners, of course, like ESPN usually talks very positively about the UFC, but therefore is also protected, and the other way around, right? Now, if an outlet like, for example, the MMA Hour, like Ariel Helwani, who's like one of the most famous MMA journalists, if he would talk bad about the UFC says, yeah, cool, you can't come to our events anymore. How about that? And so, double-edged sword. But the influence of, I think, those independents is undoubtedly rising. And as fans, I think we should support any form of ethical journalism. Yeah, that challenges the status quo. It's just a good thing, in my opinion. Speaking of ethics, if you follow my podcast, and not just this one, but if you follow previous episodes, you know I talk about ethics quite a lot. So let's consider ethical implications as we wrap up, right? So highlighted by the social responsibility theory and also the gatekeeping theory, media has an obligation to serve the public good, especially in matters, I want to say, like fighter safety and maybe even pay equity. Hey, Jake Paul. Jake, for those who don't know, Jake Paul like made a big fuss about like, I'm going to get fighters paid and so on, and we're going to start a union. Didn't happen. But yeah, so I think media should focus more on those important matters, right? So, and it doesn't really matter if it's independent media or mainstream outlets, accountability, I think, should remain a major concern. And the media simply acts as gatekeepers and decide what gets covered and what doesn't get covered and how it is presented. So that's why everyone, everywhere, all the time should always advocate for ethical journalism, in my opinion. But before I go down that rabbit hole even more and then get canceled from the UFC or from One Championship, I think I stop it here, and I think you've seen it as a bit of a whirlwind, right? When talking about like coverage, media usage, and so on when it comes to martial arts. We see that like hype culture and to influencer economies. It's clear that MMA and media are like intrinsically connected, right? So, and our role as fans/consumers is, I think, more vital than ever, because if we have sharp minds and they're sharper than our elbows, we can stay aware of those media narratives and we can be ahead of it. And we can decide if you buy into it or if you don't buy into it. So we make the decisions. So I'm curious to hear, of course, how does it work for you? Do you just follow MMA and you're just buying into all the hypes? How do you decide which hype to follow, which hype not to follow? How do you decide whether or not you like the UFC, One, PFL, whatever? Really curious to hear. So shout out at FunkItPod on social media, funkitpod@gmail.com. Like, share, subscribe. If not, I'm going to come and knock you out. Leave a review if possible. It would help so we can reach a wider audience and we can have bigger fight nights. Until then, as always, stay safe, take care, keep your guard up. Sawadee.